Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We've had a ton of requests to see my trophy room. So you've seen bits and pieces of it if you followed along for very long, but today we're going to do a start to finish trophy room tour here at my house. So let's get started. All right guys, we're going to start right here on this wall right by the fireplace, work our way all the way around and end on the other side of the fireplace. So before we get started on the mounts, I got to talk about this deer real quick. I get a ton of questions on this deer. So back in 2013, I was on a lease in Southern Ohio with like 10 other guys. I only knew one of them, which was a mistake on my part. I would never do that again. But you live and learn. So I was the last on the lease, had the last pick of where I wanted to hunt, and I started getting pictures of this giant that was actually living on public land. Um, and it was like a motocross track plus public hunting, and it was constant traffic. But I found where he was living in an old house place on our lease. But he was kind of coming into our lease right there and then exiting. He just barely came in on our lease at all, and was living mostly on this public land. So I started getting pictures of him, knew he was over 200 inches. His other side had a big club that come down and had blinded him. And so I nicknamed him Pirate Steve. Um, and I hunted that deer religiously, pretty much canceled my entire season of hunts to hunt this deer, because it's the biggest deer I'd ever got a picture of in my entire life at the time. And so, like my buddy Andy Morgan says, a big giant deer will ruin your whole hunting season. Well, that's what this one did. So it was December 17th. I had been sitting in a hotel waiting on the right wind in Southern Ohio. I needed an east wind, which we weren't getting. And so I'd been sitting in a hotel for days at this point. And I finally was getting an east wind. This is way before cell cameras even started. So I slipped in there, pulled the card on the camera, got up in the tree, was so pumped because he was daylighting so much. And went through the cards. And the night before, at like midnight, he come in with one side missing, came back an hour later with both sides missing. So I was one day too late on my east wind. At that point, I climbed down, called my buddy Mark Wimpy. We spent 3 days looking for his sheds till we found them. And I kept one, and my buddy kept one. It's a 97-inch whitetail shed right here. So we figured the other side was 93 inches, or no, 94 inches, and we figured he was right around 211 if you gave him a 20-inch spread. So just a giant whitetail. And then I ended up getting kicked off that lease after hunting season because the guy that ran the lease found out this deer lived there. So keep your big deer a secret. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. Nobody ever got that deer to my knowledge. So just a giant whitetail that lived on public land and never got killed. So let's, enough about sheds. We'll move on to some of these deer I actually killed. So moving on to some of my big mule deer right here. Some of them I don't have back yet. A lot of my big whitetail and mule deer are at the taxidermist, and my biggest elk are still at the taxidermist. But this is my biggest mule deer ever right here. And I shot it in Montana, I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago maybe. Also my longest shot ever on an animal. He went right at 190, just shot 190. But I've got several in the 180s, and like that one's from Montana. That one's in the 80s from Wyoming. That one's from Wyoming. Almost all my mule deer are from Montana and Wyoming. I think I've got a couple from Utah, but I've never killed a 200-incher, but I would love to. If I would have known what I was doing back when I was younger, I was hunting a 200-incher in Montana up in the Missouri Breaks, but I never got him killed. Hunted him for a couple years actually, but loved the mule deer hunt. I killed this one in Wyoming. It was like 183, and then the next day I went to Montana and killed that one. So that was a pretty cool couple of days there. So that's all the mule deer I have in here that are mounted. I've got some skull mounts scattered through here, but we'll move to some of these whitetail. So one of the most special places I whitetail hunt is my family farm in Southern Ohio. My dad and mom have owned a farm there since 2000, and kind of where I learned to hunt whitetails, really. Learned to hunt mature whitetails, for sure. And so I've killed a couple of my biggest bucks there on my mom and dad's farm, and this was one of them. This is a buck I actually self-filmed myself shoot. Self-filmed myself, yeah, kind of self-explanatory. But I filmed myself shoot, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and he was just a giant typical that we had decided to pass the year before, me and Micah and Dad, and took a chance. And the next year he blew up, and this was his sheds are a little chewed up, but from year to year, how much he blew up, and it was pretty impressive the amount of time he put on from 4 to 5. He was 181 typical, so a really really big deer, and that was a really special hunt there with my brother and my dad. So. Let me see. This is a buck. This was Samantha's first Boone and Crockett whitetail in Kansas. 175. Um, me and Micah were really wanting to hunt this piece of property and get permission, and we never did. And I think I shot a 145-inch 10. It's in here somewhere. It's a stud deer. And then the landowner called and gave us permission while we were dragging it out. So I went and hung a stand, and Samantha shot a 175 out of it the next day. So Kansas is also just one of those places that has been so good to us over the years. That buck right there was my first buck ever in Kansas, and I shot it on public land, some walk-in hunting that me and my dad found out there. Went in and hung a stand, and the first morning, a 161 comes walking down the creek and smoked it. I never forget that feeling. I could tell you what the air smelled like that morning because that was the biggest buck of my life at the time. And really, really cool. It's so funny. I can't remember what I ate for lunch yesterday, but almost every animal in this entire room, I can tell you the date, the temperature, and take you back to the spot where I shot it. Just that vivid, and I love bow hunting that much. I don't hardly forget anything. That's another one of my most special animals ever. That was also on my mom and dad's farm in Southern Ohio. 2011 or 12. Had 4 drops, over 26 inches of drop time. Had no idea that the deer even was alive. I had never seen a picture of him, nothing. And smoked him October the 27th at 11 o'clock in the morning. So just cruising through the timber. Just a monster, and I absolutely freaked out when I shot him because I just thought he was a double drop tine. I get up to him, he's got 4 drop tines, and it was just one of those mornings. It's like I'll never see another deer like that. That was another drop tine deer I shot in Illinois, back-to-back years actually. This was a big 6x6. The last deer I ever got if you guys followed along, I hunted with a guy named Sean Evans for years in Kansas. A lot of these big deer came hunting with him. And this was the last deer I ever shot, getting to hunt with the Evans family out there. Miss them dearly. Miss hunting there a lot. We had some really, really good times. That was a giant. Me and Micah hunted that deer for several years. He actually had gotten smaller. I've got his shed around here somewhere, but yeah, right here actually. That was him. He was kind of going downhill. He had added a point on, but he was like 8 years old. So really, really cool to have that kind of history and kill him. These 2 deer, my best ever back-to-back sits by far. So I killed this one that we called No Brows in Illinois. Drove straight to Kansas. The next sit, I shot this giant. He's 178, standing in a creek. I rattled him in first morning, shot him like 10 yards, standing in a creek. Back-to-back sits, 2 megas, and I'll never forget that. I was like, that's the luckiest stretch of my life. And then 3 days later, Samantha shoots her biggest buck ever, like a 196 and some change in Kansas at 10 in the morning on a super moon. It was 70 degrees. So just a crazy week of hunting. Definitely the best week stretch of the Morgan family bow hunting for sure. These 3 bucks all killed the same week, the same year, literally like 4 days apart. So ton of big deer up here. I can't talk about all of them. This is Skipper, a net boon I shot down in South Texas. Had 28-inch main beams, which was just stupid big, the biggest main beams by far that I've got. I've kind of put both my big Texas deer on pedestals. And then this one I shot also South Texas. Hellboy he was 185. Then behind him, two more really special deer to us. These me and Samantha killed back-to-back years on our farm here in Pennsylvania. You know, we were told for years we couldn't kill big deer here in PA. This is where Samantha wanted to be, so this is where we bought a farm and decided we were going to try it. And so Samantha killed a buck we called Superstar, 167. Next year I killed Browse, 166. So 2 studs for the mountains of Pennsylvania, and we're still trying to grow them to this day. So those are 2 really special ones that we will not forget ever. And moving on down, just a ton of bucks I've shot since I was 16. This one is my first big buck ever. I was 14, hunting my mom and dad's farm in southern Ohio. No idea what I was doing. Opening day, like October 1st. It's 80-some degrees, and I'm morning hunting a bunch of acorns that I'd hung a lock on, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning. Like, what are you doing sitting there at 11 in the morning on opening day, you know, in the middle of the woods? But no idea which way the wind was blowing. I think I got my arrows from Walmart, probably an old 3-blade fixed head, and shooting a Rival Pro. I do remember that. We didn't have the money to get a hunting bow and a competition bow back then, so I hunted with my competition bow. So I looked up, and he was coming in with another giant together, eating acorns at 11 in the morning, and I smoked him. That was way before video days, but I remember calling my dad on the radio. We had 2-way radios, and I just couldn't even talk. And I remember hearing his diesel truck crank up at their house, and the running boards rattling as he was coming up to get me. That's like the things I remember about hunting when I was a kid, the excitement of Dad coming up to get me. I could hear the running boards rattling on his truck. I couldn't wait for him to get there and see this buck I just shot. So that was a special one. My biggest Mississippi deer right here, Crooked Brows. You guys watched that hunt if you watched any of our hunts in the last couple years. Just a mega giant framed whitetail from Mississippi. And this one you guys haven't watched yet because I just killed it the other day. It's a 196 4/8, my biggest buck ever. Not a huge frame deer, crazy mass, over 40 inches of mass, and 19 scoreable points. Just stuff everywhere. So you guys will get to watch that hunt very soon. Pretty cool deer that I'm pumped with. I hadn't got him to the taxidermist yet. But honestly, these are all awesome bucks. I could tell you the story about every one of them. Landon's first buck with a crossbow right there. No, first buck with a crossbow right there. Then that was another buck he killed with a crossbow. This buck I killed right here behind my house on my 3D range. So just crazy cool stuff with the whitetails. So we'll move on from most of the whitetails now and get into some of these Super Slam animals. So like 2013, I really started going after the Super Slam with a bow. Wanted to be the youngest to ever do it at the time and all that, blah, blah, blah. And then kids started coming left and right and goals changed. But I have almost got the Super Slam at this point. I'm not going to be the youngest to ever get it by any means. But this was one of those animals that I went and did, one of those hunts I went and did during that span, 2013, 2017. I really went hard after those animals. This was a huge American bison I killed on a free-range and herd in Colorado. They estimated him to be like 13 years old, just a giant old bull. So I figured I would probably never go and do another bison hunt. So I got a half body mount of him. Really cool hunt. Super cold. Super cold hunt. It was like 10 below out there, but we ended up getting a big one and probably never go back and do it again, but I'm glad that I did it once. I guess before I walk past it, I'll talk about it a little bit. You know, I've not ever been one to put up my trophies from competition. I've got plaques stacked everywhere and trophies and bowls and cups and stuff, but this was kind of easy to do, so I did it. I put some of my belt buckles in a case. This was one of my world championship wins. I put the riser of the TRX in the limbs and the arrow that I shot the winning shot for the 2021 World Championship, and I got my belt buckle in there with it. I want to do this more. Maybe after I retire, I'll get all my cups and stuff out and maybe build a glass case and put it in it, but just not I'm going so hard that time of year, from early spring through the summer. It's like one tournament after the next, and I feel like as I win, I'm just putting them in my office or here and there in storage until I can figure out what to do with it. So these are a lot of my world championship belt buckles right here, national championships, stuff like that. Some of these were the Texas shootout. One of these was a belt buckle after my buddy Gene Curry died, and they had dedicated the Paris, Texas shoot to him. And I really wanted to win that because it was going to be a one-of-a-kind belt buckle. And I hadn't won the Paris, Texas shoot very much in my career, but that weekend I was pretty dialed in and ended up winning that belt buckle, the Gene Curry belt buckle. And so Miss Gene, he was always a character out on the range, so that's one of my special ones for sure. But all right, let's get into some of these other animals. This was a pretty recent hunt. The aoudad hunt I did in the Davis Mountains with Topo, Texas, Scotty Campbell, and Aaron Snyder. Justin Hanna went with us. A bunch of us went down and just had a blast hunting these things. I'd done a bunch of sheep hunts like Doll and Stone and Desert and all that stuff, but man, I enjoyed hunting these aoudad. I killed this big ram, it was 33 inches, and then I ended up shooting a ewe afterwards and thought it'd be really cool to do that mount with them both in it. So that buck you guys might recognize. I'm not going to talk about many of my European, but we did an episode not too long ago in the last year where I killed a big buck with a switchback. I went and did the whole thing with a switchback, and that's him in Mississippi. So if you haven't seen that, definitely go check it out. It's one of our cool ones in my opinion. So obviously mountain goat, only one I've ever done, probably the only one I'll ever do. That was in Chetwynd, British Columbia. I went and did that hunt. My brother broke his arm on that hunt. My guide ended up having to film me shoot that thing. It was a heck of a tough hunt. And this was my first caribou, Quebec Labrador caribou. I don't even think you can hunt those anymore. That's when I got introduced to adventure hunting, I guess you should say. I think I pulled every muscle I had that week, chasing those stupid things in the tundra. But it was a fun week. I'm not going to talk about all these whitetails. This was a Doll sheep I shot in Alaska, just a giant ram. My desert bighorn from the Baja of Mexico. This was a riverbend whitetail, big one. Missouri. So you guys remember a minute ago when I was talking about me and Micah wanting to get permission to hunt this guy's property. Never did, and I ended up shooting a buck, and as I was dragging him out, he gave us permission. Samantha went in and killed a booner. That's the 10-pointer I shot. Nice buck, old buck, but I sure wish I'd have waited another hour. But this was my first sheep right here. This was a Fannin that I count for my stone. I shot in the Yukon. Me and Micah did a 14-day horseback trip. Man, I could tell stories about that hunt because we got faced with everything you could imagine, from blizzards, no food, you name it. But really, really cool hunt. I shot that one at like a 36-degree downhill angle with my bow and smoked it. But man, I remember that like it was yesterday too. And this was a mountain caribou that I killed. Actually, the same trip as I killed my Yukon moose. That was in the Northwest Territories. And they have some giant caribou up there in NWT, but I killed my moose, which is what I went there to do, and there was a float plane that I could get out on the next day. If I didn't, I had to wait 5 more days, and I missed my kids. So this first caribou gave me a shot. I killed it and came home. So here's just some more whitetails up here. An Illinois one, Texas, Wyoming, Nebraska. This was a cool one right here because this is the first buck I killed on our farm in Pennsylvania. Not a giant, 140 I think is what it is. But for here and for me, it's really special because it was the first one I shot on my own farm. Anybody that owns property knows that's a special feeling. So So this is kind of a cool wall right here, kind of mix and matched animals. This is a Colombian blacktail I shot in California. This is a Sitka blacktail I shot on Sikalitic, right across from Kodiak Island. Landon's first buck with a compound. Obviously a mountain lion I shot. This was definitely a hunt I'll never do again. Not fun at all, I'll just be honest with you. It was 40 below. I was on sleds. They don't really run from you. So it was not a hunt that I enjoyed, if I got to be honest. Well, one of the ones that was on the Super Slam list, very cool experience, you know, going up there with the Inuits. We went 340 miles on a snowmobile, you know, camping in the Arctic looking for these things. But I really honestly didn't enjoy the hunt part of it. I wish I would have just been going to, I don't know if I would even do that because it's just a brutal, brutal place. But it's not one that I enjoyed and not one that, Lord willing, I'll ever go do again. Mule deer, I think I shot in Wyoming. Bunch of good whitetails. River Bend, Mississippi. This is Kansas, Texas, Missouri. Some bear skulls. And then a really, really cool animal. That was a Coues deer. I went down to Sonora, I forget what year, 2015 maybe. The only Coues deer hunt I ever went on, it was on New Year's Eve, and I shot 121-inch typical Coues deer, which I didn't know it at the time. I thought I just shot a small whitetail spot and stalk in the mountains, and my buddy was freaking out. Cameron Peeler was the guy's name, and he was freaking out. Thought I shot the world record, and I was like, "What?" It was just kind of a tiny looking whitetail, and yeah, he got up to it. I'm pretty sure he was crying, and that's when I kind of realized I'd shot the biggest Coues deer I'll ever shoot in my life, so I never went back. But really, really hard animal to stalk. To call him the gray ghost, I mean, it was a tough hunt. I just got super lucky, I'll be honest. I was stalking like an 80-incher, and then we saw that one, and I ended up killing it. So pretty cool there. There's another one of my caribou, I forget which one it is. I've got all of them but the Alaskan Barren Ground. I forget which one that is. This was a grizzly I shot in Alaska that we never aired that footage. We should definitely make a YouTube show out of that because it was one of my favorite hunts of all time. I shot it with a bow, and then the guide shot it with a rifle after I shot it with a bow. So I had to go back for the archery Super Slam and get it, but still one of my favorite hunts ever. This is my buddy Justin Hanna's Audad. So if you're watching this, Justin, please come get it. It's taking up room in my house. Giant elk I shot in Montana. My second biggest elk ever, big 7x7. If you guys haven't watched that hunt, you should go back and watch it. Really, really cool hunt with my buddy Dustin DeCrew. This is a woodland caribou right here that I shot in Newfoundland or however they say it up there. First day we were riding in on the Argo and we were supposed to go with Argo across the lake, camp and hunt after that, and we found this big guy on our way in and ended up not even getting to the camp. So I always like a quick hunt for sure. And there's just a lot of good bulls. Most of these bulls that I've shot here are bulls from back in the day in New Mexico that are on these Euros. Where I used to get landowner tags down there, you could get a landowner tag for like $3,500. And so forever, I would buy a landowner tag and just go down there and camp and never see anybody and just hunt with me and a guy running camera. And I killed a lot of bulls where I really learned to elk hunt. And a lot of 300 to 320 bulls. And this was the biggest one I ever shot down there on a DIY hunt with my dad. I took my dad, who had never killed an elk, and that was one of my favorite days ever, honestly, hunting. We doubled up on bulls. I called in a bull for him. He killed it. I kept calling, and the herd bull broke and came right in, and I killed him. He was right at 340 on that hunt. This is a Utah bull. This was my first Roosevelt elk right here. I have another Roosevelt, too, that I don't have in here. All those bulls pretty much came from New Mexico. This was my first bull from Idaho. Looks like it's about to fall. Probably one of my kids hit it with a football, but Those were my first couple elk right there. And then my Canadian moose, I shot in New Brunswick, and a giant black bear I shot in British Columbia, 515 pounds, 7'4" squared. Me and Micah spot and stalked him in the middle of British Columbia. And then, I guess last but not least for sure, Micah, back up and try to get this sucker in there, was my giant Yukon moose. 60-some inches. One of the coolest experiences ever. Shot him at 88 yards and full, like sticking out both sides, just smoked him and watched him fall. He's a giant animal, and I honestly love moose hunting. I love elk and moose because you're interacting with them, calling them in. So honestly, that was like hitting the high points for sure in my my trophy room. And I've got a lot of stuff that's not in here. I've got a giant caribou. I've got a Dall sheep that's not here. My biggest elk. 2 of my biggest whitetail aren't in here. So a lot of stuff that we don't have. We'll do another one. I think it'd be cool to pick 3 animals, go back and watch the hunts and really tell the story well. Go through my trophy room. I have so much to say. It's so hard to skip past some of these animals without telling the story because it's so vivid in my mind. So we'll definitely come back and do a closer look at individual animals and kind of the history behind them and the story. But I wanted to give you guys kind of an overview of our trophy room here and kind of how it's laid out, what we got in here. My archery shop's on the other side. Maybe we'll do a tour of that later. My podcast room, my office. It's all connected here. So really blessed. People come in here and I take it for granted because I'm in here every day and they just sit here and stare at this stuff. And it really makes me think how blessed I am. If I never get to go on another hunt, never get to go to another archery tournament, all the experiences I've got to have with a bow in my hand, it's been incredible. And I hope it's not over, but if it is, I would be okay with it because God has blessed me so much. So thank you for watching this trophy room tour. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the like button. We appreciate all you guys for following along. Like I said, we'll dive in deeper, but we got to go get in the stand. So thanks again.